we should not try and alter the consequences to change the behavior. We should change the contingencies.
Welcome to Learning About Dogs, a podcast for people who love learning about dogs. I'm Sue McGuire. I am very much the student in this episode as Kay Lawrence discusses the concept of contingencies in play around a behavior. You know, clickers are a wonderful tool, but you can't necessarily click your way out of trouble. So today we talk about contingencies, or rather I listen while Kay talks about contingencies. So let's do so together.
Okay, so shall we say when you get exposed to people studying in other fields, they can often say one thing and you think, yeah, that's cool if you're in an academic field, but that's not what we do as practitioners. And I'm sure it works the other way, that what we do as practitioners, like use words like click fishing, means something entirely different in an academic world. Yes, successive attempts or whatever. And the term that I've heard more than once recently was contingencies change behavior, consequences, which is in our case reinforcers, maintain or strengthen. And I thought, yeah, we've got to run with this because so often people are trying to use the consequences to change the behavior. Now, if the behavior is not what you want in the first place and you're just relying on consequences, clicking, reinforcing, you're just going to make that stronger. So under the conditions where this is not the behavior I want, I need it to change, we should not try and alter the consequences to change the behavior. We should change the contingencies. Now then you start going, okay, what are contingencies? So the list is anything that can influence what the dog's doing. So contingencies could be genetic predispositions. So say I was asking the Gordon Setter, Merrick, to lie down, drop. She's quite happy to drop at my feet. To her, it has no issues at all. Wherever she drops, she's happy to drop. But for a Border Collie, dropping at my feet is uncomfortable. They're too close to you. You just want a bit of distance because to them, that genetic inheritance they have requires them to drop and be able to see the whole sheep. You get the difference? So that would be a contingency that I would need to change. So if I want the collies to drop, I need to make sure they've got a good couple of arms length away from me to do it so they can see me. So I've changed one of the contingencies that enables that dog to be successful. It's a change in the environment, but it's also a contribution from their genetic makeup. Your history. So if you've been training a certain behavior, you know we have this term, it's the hot behavior. It's what the dog's been reinforced for the most in their previous training sessions. That is going to pop up in the middle of your training session, particularly if you're trying to train something similar, like a bow and walking backwards. They're sort of very similar, so one might easily get confused with the other. So that's another contingency you've got to consider. The floor the dog is standing on. If you've got a young puppy, male Labrador puppy that's 15 weeks old and you're on a shiny floor and you ask it to SIT, his bum's going to have a bit of trouble staying on the spot because he's going to slip around a bit and it's going to slide there and he won't be able to hold it. And, oh, this is difficult. I don't think I'll do that again. That's a contingency that would need to be changed for that behavior to be successful. On the right track?
On the right track.
So if we look at these reinforcers, the changes your reinforcers make, strengthen, maintain, but they don't change the behavior. If we regard change as the behavior being different, not just the same behavior going on for longer, stronger, the same. Does that make sense?
Isn't so this just different? Yeah, so this sounds very much just like different language for, I think, what most of us embrace already. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. What I'm seeing is the dog is doing something quite undesirable.
Okay.
And nothing in the environment. There are no change to the contingencies, but let's try and click our way out of it.
Oh, is that how it's being applied?
Sorry?
Oh, that's how it's being applied?
Well, yeah, because the clicker's the all-powerful thing, isn't it? So, say, for instance, we've got a dog that's just gone into hyper alert because it's seen something that is a reason to go into hyper alert. I mean, it could be a rabbit, it could be another dog, it could be a person, it could be a tree falling over, I don't know what it is. Dog's gone into hyper alert. Click, treat. Because you're trying to prevent the dog from going off on one. You with me? It's not doing anything wrong, it's standing still. Let's just click and treat. And we'll actually get this to change. Under these conditions, then, when the dog sees the thing that's causing it to hyper alert, it's going to have a different emotional response. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I think you actually might have just strengthened something you didn't mean to strengthen.
Yes. And what I see then is the dog start to scan the environment for these events. So the dog now has been strengthened in environmental scanning. Mm-hmm. It's now looking for the rabbit, looking for the person, searching around. Look left, look right, look forward, look backwards. Where's that dog? So I can go into hyper alert. There we are. Click, treat.
Oh,
so I just think that the dog has so much of the burden to change their behavior. When we start to get this purist, it's the consequences that change behavior. Do you see what I mean? So people are starting to think, if I reinforce this and ignore that, then ignoring that's going to make it go away. No, it's not. You're just going to make that stronger, but you haven't made the basic changes that you need to happen.
I think they're getting ahead of themselves. They're getting way ahead of themselves. It sounds to me an awful lot like people taking counter conditioning into the wrong environment.
Oh, well, and some. I mean, it's the whole misunderstanding of what desensitization is.
Exactly.
But it's starting to become like it's not the person's job to make the environment change. It's the dog's job to make their changes. Do you get to see what I mean? So if the contingencies are not changing.
Yeah.
So if you've got a dog that, say, aggresses at people when they come to the house. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we look at all the contingencies, the people in the family getting excited, the house where the dog is, somebody knocking on the front door, all of those are contingencies. If those don't change, how can the behavior change?
Exactly.
Well, often it's not. It's now we have to put the dog through this sort of treatment and therapy, and the dog has to work out what it's got to do instead to get the reinforce. Oh, my goodness me.
Oh, instead of changing the contingencies, like, hey, it's your front door, not your dog's.
Yeah, whatever. Let's just learn how to behave differently when we have guests come to the house. Let's just train the dog to do something else instead. And I just see the burden going back onto the dog again. And I don't, much as I think they're clever, they should not have to bear that burden for people having screwed up the contingencies in the first place and then not be prepared to change them.
My goodness.
Yeah, or they'll put something on the dog like a head collar or a harness that pulls back, and all the other things they'll start to do. So then it's the consequences of punishing that behavior that often force the change. But it's not, that just diminishes it, hasn't changed the behavior at all. But this is where we get stuck with, well, he doesn't do that anymore. Yeah, but he'd bloody like to. He'd like to, but you've actually punished, the growling and the staring, but it hasn't actually changed the behavior. It's diminished it, but it hasn't changed it.
Yeah, I think you've masked it, but it hasn't really gone away. I always worry about people who throw out terms like that, and then they also throw out conditioned emotional responses, and I just that is so loaded for me. I
think it rather depends on your background. This is a science that covers too many different faculties, should we say? When you hear somebody talking who's got a purely psychological background or a background in psychology studies, that's where they'll want to come from. And what's the trite comment? A psychologist tries to change the underlying response to change the behavior, and a behaviorist will change the behavior to change the underlying response. But I can see what they mean. Yes, which comes first? Which comes first? Well, both and neither.
And certainly, oh my goodness, I actually think it's ethically unsound to. I mean, I work in a shelter, for criminy sakes. If I did not change conditions continually,
contingencies,
conditions, environment, contingencies, continuously all day long, I'm going to get what I get.
I find contingencies just a bit broader than let's change the environment. Actually, let's change the history. Yes, let's change that dog's experience, because those are all part of the contingencies that can be affected to change the behavior.
I
And
guess
often
I'm
that might
questioning.
be, go on,
How can you
something
change
like
a dog?
just,
Oh, no, how can you change? I'm going to stop. How can you change a dog's history?
well, because you build a new history. You can't take away the history. But say, for instance, you've got your dogs in their kennels and runs, and certain types of people walking past are distressing for that dog. Well, you can change that response by certain types of people changing their clothing, or as every time they go past, there's food chucked in. So there's whole ways of changing their experience to change the behavior. But that's not about consequences. That's not waiting for the dog to elicit the change themselves so that you can then act as the reinforcer.
I guess I sort of disagree with people showing up at kennels and popping food like that's going to change a dog's emotional state or whatever. I mean, I probably take it a little step further than that. It's like this dog does not
absolutely.
like you
but that's
staring at you.
That's one, if you like, micro contingency that we could change.
We could, yes.
One micro, so
probably low in the totem pole for me, but
but there's a whole bunch of, it's not the dog's job to change their behavior. It's not their job.
Exactly.
It's our job to set them up to be able to be successful.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
And when we say, you've got to change the environment, it's more than the environment. They might need to be fed before they go training. They might need to have, with Border Collies, we do this sheep balls game. That is a critical part of them being able to cope with traffic. And to me, it's a contingent, on being able to feel good about being a sheepdog. And it relieves a lot of frustration for them. So do we have to put together a history where they learn how to deal with frustration? And it's not just called impulse control. Some dogs, particularly what they call high drive dogs, have a very low threshold to become frustrated, which is what makes them great dogs to train, because they become aroused very, very quickly.
Woo. So I think that's an important word to call it, just beyond conditions, beyond environment, contingencies. That's a bigger umbrella, isn't it?
Until I made myself start to use it, I was, the environment's got to change. You need to change what you're doing. We need to make the dog have a different view out from your kennels. It needs to be less, a whole bunch of things. We'd say the environment has to change. Well, it's bigger than that. And some of these contingencies we can't change. You're probably not going to change the predisposition or the history, as you said. But there may be a dog food that you're feeding that causes the dog to have an irritable bowel. That's a contingency.
No, for sure.
That's going to affect the dog's behavior. Certainly affect mine, anyway.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by these people who think they can feed their dog out of a condition or feed their dog. I'm floored by that.
As treatment. As treatment.
Yes.
And then call it therapy.
Yeah.
So we just have to practice. Oh, that's so interesting. Could you give me some evidence on that? I'd love to research it further.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hear somebody go, oh, that's so interesting, you go, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just makes me think I'm on the right track with my sheltering practice.
Yeah.
It's just, I can't change their history. I can't change the whatever trauma they have been through. I can't change the fact that they probably are medically a little dicey at this point, but I can change a lot of other stuff.
Yep. And it's all those changes that we have access to that start to build them into a dog that's livable with. Yes, it's not the dog that has to turn themselves around.
Yeah.
If the environment doesn't change, I don't see how we can expect the dog to change.
We can't. Creating environments where the dog is allowed to be the best dog they can be. I always tell people the dog in a shelter is not a normal dog. It's not a normal life. It's not the life they should be living. It is a port in the storm. So let's get them out as much as possible. Let's get them hiking up mountains. Let's let them snuffling in wetlands and what have you. Starting September 18th, Q Technology is a 6-lesson online course through learning about dogs. The course takes students through cues, signals, and stimulus. Prompts are an integral part of our teaching and training and living with dogs. Giving a cue and responding to a cue is a conversation where questions are asked and answered. The course will cover teaching and practicing cue seeking, thoughtful development and application of cues, using teaching cues during the learning process that graduate to life or performance. Online classes are on Wednesdays, but students may access their forums during the class times. Sign up at Learning About Dogs.